So just continuing on from the conversation on Let's Address This. Hey, Nyla.
Hello.
Um, so let me kind of just share my story. So I grew up in it. So there's some things like that Nyla's talking about, and these are actual like lived experiences for me. So some things, when you're a kid, you just kind of like um you take for granted that it was there because it felt normal because that's what you did. Yeah, girl, we back. So regarding the women, one of the things that I noticed, their messaging changed around women. And I never really felt comfortable with that. So someone had mentioned in the chat about women, so I'm going to address it. So when I was a child, I had mentioned that my mom had joined the mosque or the Nation of Islam with my father. And they used to hit women in the mosque. Like they would used to like because that's what they thought they were supposed to do from what they in order to keep women in line from the teachings that they thought that they were getting from others in the from other Muslims, right? Male Muslims, is in order to get your yes hit. So they would hit them in the mosque. So it would be like in the mosque, and you would see it inside the mosque happening. So I might have been about 3 or 4, and my mother, I guess she had enough of it. And so my father, he was, I believe he was either a teacher or imam at the mosque. And but my mother got up because I think something happened where someone was assaulted, and my mother got up and she basically told them, she, black woman, got up and she kind of like cussed them out and everything, and told them that she's not going to be exactly like she said that she was not going to stay. She was going to leave, and that was her thing, that she was not going to leave. So maybe when I was like 4 or 5, we were pulled. We were taken out I was taken out of the mosque because she didn't want me to think that abuse was normal. So that was one of the things that my mom that happened. But as I was in like middle school, high school, the message changed. And the messaging changed to women are the creators of life, and they're the backbones of family. So they should be respected within the home. And that was one of the big things that for my that had changed as far as that was concerned. But the women were always like, oh, extremely like soft spoken. They didn't necessarily speak unless they felt like there was space for them to speak, and it didn't feel like if the room was full, they didn't feel like they could speak. And my mother did not ever want me to be subjected to that or think that I was okay with that. So when I was like 7 years old, my mother made an agreement with my father because he still wanted us to know about Islam. And so once every other week, I would go to the mosque or I would go to a church service. And that's how it was like for me when I was growing up. But my mother was like, no. But the change of the messaging, like I used to I would tell my father that the changing of the messaging seemed suspect to me, because if you're going to stand on it 10 toes down, not because
Mhm.
it's not popular or because you don't feel like it's going to keep your culture in, and it seemed flaky when if you think about it, it kind of seemed flaky to me. that was one of the red flags about it. But I know someone had wanted to mention that about had talked about that with, and I promised that I was going to talk about that. So.
Wow. You know what that reminds me of when you say that the women were taught to like be quiet and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know the LDS the Mormon churches
Mm-hmm.
in like Utah and stuff like that, they have that thing where they would tell the women that they needed to keep sweet. And keep
Mm-hmm.
sweet basically means that you're always smiling, you don't show anger, you don't show any emotion outside smiling. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, but shout out to your mom and big ups to her for like saying not my daughter.
Yeah, yeah, she did. And you know, I was little. That I mean, I had the whole outfit on and all of those things. But then there were other things about um within my experiences of that were just um weird or odd, I would say, with it from growing up. And it kind of made me feel like, you know, the energy was different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the energy was different. And so um you know, you had mentioned about the not wearing shoes, and you would wear shoes when you go into some people's houses, but it wasn't. And then when you would go into the mosque, when they would come in and they would check you, like they would check, you know, make sure you didn't have anything. So everyone that
That's
came
something
in,
I've never seen either at a mosque.
yeah,
That's that's wild.
everyone that came in was getting checked for security. I get, you know, that we're getting checked for security. But the other part of this too is that there were also incidents, like you remember when with the stories around being followed, like with Malcolm X and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of things happened when I was growing up too. You know, but it was for personal things. You know, trying to follow someone to see if there's like information or something like that. That happened too when I was growing up as well. You know, and that always seemed suspect as well. You know, it was weird because sometimes like my father would feel like someone was always watching him, and he would think it was the government, or he would think it was this or something else. But
Wow.
it was, yep, it was wild. Most definitely, it was wild.
So I also had this girl that used to I'm sorry that I'm calling her girl, but
It's
this
okay.
woman
Hmm.
that she worked for me. She was a massage therapist, and she is the former wife of a former heavyweight. No, she's the current wife. They're still married. He was a heavyweight champion at one time. His name was Oliver McCall, and he was Nation of Islam, and at one point he was rich. And Oliver McCall was also a known womanizer, drug addict, and an abuser, right? And he was very physically abusive towards his wife and very openly cheating. And they've never really taught or preached polygamy in the nation,
No.
even though we know that Elijah Muhammad had a whole bunch of wives, and Farrakhan has always had two wives, at least two. But this guy had all these women. He was abusive, disrespectful. He was a drug addict, and she would go to the mosque and go to the elders and like let them know, hey, he's abusing me. She showed up with black eyes. She would show up with like missing teeth. I mean, psychological abuse, all this kind of stuff. And he would bring women home, tell her that she had to leave their bedroom because he had someone else that he wanted to put in their bedroom. And they would not allow her to leave. And when I say allow, it's because there was a deep control over her. When your spirituality, and this is something that I talk about in the Mammy DSM as well, when your spirituality or your relationship of God with God is intertwined with culture, with your marriage and all of this kind of stuff, it's a dangerous and sticky place. And she did not have a lot of support, so she could not necessarily navigate this situation, but they, you know, they basically told her, no, you do not have the right to divorce, even though technically in traditional Islam, women have the right to divorce. But the nation basically made her think that she did not have, and this is under the leadership of Farrakhan. So they were members of Mas Miriam. So she could not divorce him because it was a public image thing. He had a lot of money at that time. He was giving them a lot of money. So they basically told her, Allah will be pleased with you one day if you just endure. And she did. I mean, and what's so sad about he beat this girl until she was cross-eyed. That's how many headshots that she had gotten at one time. And then, even in terms of that, that's a cult when they're controlling your marriage and they're doing stuff like that. But just there is a shadiness behind, the nation, period. And it's like, I will say this, though. I feel like most cults, like even if you think of like the Nature Boy cult, right? If we remember him early on, it didn't seem so bad. He was talking about healthy food, eating organically, eating less meat, touching grass, and all this kind of stuff. So out the gate, most cults, and I don't know if you agree with this, but it seems like most of them seem to come off as pretty helpful, pretty informative. It makes a lot of sense. And I think that with Black people, I feel like we have another vulnerability there because in case you have been sleeping on the rug, everybody wants to correct us, right? Mm-hmm. We need our marriages correct. We need to know how to act in public. Everybody needs to give us instructions. And what better medium to instruct you on how to be a better Black person than your religion, right? But let's kind of get into the nation. And some of the history or whatever, so we can kind of get into some of this stuff that it's definitely giving cult vibes, right? So, they are one of the most powerful and controversial movements in, I guess in Black religiosity, for lack of better words, outside of like maybe a Dr. York, but they've had a run uninterrupted, right? But behind all those speeches and those bow ties and the bean pies, which are really, really good. And we should probably talk about that too. Like how, like they literally those guys have to sell those bean pies, have to sell those final calls. It is literally like, you have to do that.
It's like a factory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it. So if you think about it, when the Nation of Islam really blew up, it was around the time of the 60s when we were really kind of like waking up and we were standing up for our rights. We were doing the marches. And so it would make sense. Why do, a white man's religion when we can have our own religion? You know what I'm saying? So I think that was a big part of it too. Like there was something for Blacks. And that's a big part of the reason why it got in that way. But even there's so much. There's so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so even with, the split that happened with the Nation of Islam, and it's like Elijah Muhammad's family, went one way to a degree, and then Farrakhan was the prince of taking over the part that Elijah Muhammad had stood for, and that split that had happened as well. And I remember my, now he wasn't my grandfather, but it was an elderly couple, and they used to watch me and my brother when we were little. And I recall that my dad and he would, like, they were a Muslim couple, and they would have heated conversations about this because he was following Farad. He had decided that he was going to follow Farad, and my father wanted to go ahead and he wanted to follow Farrakhan. And it's almost like they make him into a god, because I remember times where in the mosque they would talk about who is our God, and they would say, Farrakhan, or they would say Elijah Muhammad is our Messiah, and they would say
Wait,
things
they
like
would
that.
say that Farrakhan was their God?
Yes.
Wow. So here's what I did notice. So back when I was following what they were doing, I noticed that they would basically say that Wallace was Allah, and they said that Elijah was the messenger. Kind of like in traditional Islam, you have Allah, and then you have the Prophet Muhammad, who would be the
Mm-hmm.
messenger. But
Mm-hmm.
with the Nation of Islam, it was Wallace who was Allah, and then Elijah was the messenger. But I did notice in recent years that Farrakhan, when Farrakhan kind of took over, he became the messenger.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's not the messenger. He's like, I don't know what they're calling him anymore, but now I think he must be God to them now.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting.
Right. So it was pretty much like making him into a god. And when Elijah Muhammad had actually passed away, there were comments made. Well, Elijah didn't pass away, because they couldn't wrap their heads around someone as wonderful, fantastic, pure, holy as him actually passing away. They would say, "Oh, he's just in the mountains hidden."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't.
So,
They really just wanted to kind of deify him. They did not want to admit that
absolutely.
this guy had died. Same thing with what is it, Wallace and Elijah? They basically tried to say that they
Yeah.
never died. Because
Mm-hmm.
y'all do know they're supposed to all be on a spaceship. It's supposed to be Wallace, Elijah, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, and somebody else. It's like 7 or 8 of them. They on a spaceship circling the planet. Okay.
Crazy.
So yeah. They believe the mothership. The mothership. They're on a spaceship. But like again, with them, like you got to think about, like, they've got all these polished speeches, and they got their bow ties and stuff, but there's scandal, secrecy, violence, and they do have this cult-like devotion that you just cannot get past. Okay, so
And speaking of cults, I'm sorry to
mhm,
interrupt you, but you mentioned the bow ties.
mhm,
They have the Fruit of Islam, which is
yes,
like their with the bow ties and all of
Missouri.
those things.
Mhm,
And then they have the mothers. I believe it's the MOIs, the Mothers of Islam. And that's like
mhm.
their military, if you think
Yeah,
about it.
it is.
So, hmm but I
And
wanted to
tell you
bring that up.
something else.
Hmm.
It is definitely their military. Do you know that when it comes to the nation, there's only certain places. I don't know exactly why it's like this or why they have this status, but this leads me to, put my conspiracy hat on. Because I do believe that Farrakhan is an agent, because there's no way if this was really a powerful Black movement, that they would have been uninterrupted for this many years. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
There's no way, with all of the threats to white people and calling white people devils and all this kind of stuff. I just do not believe they would allow a threatening, menacing, you guys are the white devils. You know what I mean? I don't think that they would allow them to exist if they were a real threat. But
Right.
you cannot pull the police, and I didn't witness this myself, but this was highly televised locally, probably in Chicago. The police have no jurisdiction at Mosque Miriam. They cannot go, whatever they got going on, the police don't have jurisdiction on their grounds, as well as some places are not even permitted to deliver there. So there's some sort of covering that they have that is really it's really a trip. It's really a trip.
The concern is well, you know how a lot of times with cults too, where people are part of a cult, and you always feel like Big Brother is watching, right? So there was always this, oh, the devil is watching us, and the devil would be the white man. You know, the white man is watching us, or the white man's doing this, or the white man's doing that. So that's interesting that the police and the authorities didn't have, because the messaging within the mosque was, you got to be careful because of how you move, because they might be watching us, or they may be sort of surveying us. And to a degree, like if it was in the 60s particularly, that was there was some truth to that, probably, you know. But as time has progressed, I don't think that's necessarily true anymore. So
but like one of the things too that gives cult vibes is the mystery behind Fard Muhammad. Like, people really don't know who he was. He just like popped up in Detroit in 1930, which, if you think, like, it's common for a for someone of Pakistani descent to come around now, but in the 30s. So this Pakistani man pops up out of nowhere in 1930 in Detroit with all these strange teachings about Islam and Black identity. Why would a Pakistani man have all this understanding about Black identity, and why would he be teaching about Black identity? Like, who gave him the authority? This literally, he was from Pakistan, and again, like I said, he was an Ahmadi Muslim. Some people said that he was half white, but both his parents, from what I understand, were from Pakistan. They were very, very light. And then he just vanishes in 1934, right? Just this mysterious disappearance, and he was never confirmed dead or alive to this day.
He was probably up in the mountains like everybody else,
like in the mountains or the spaceship. So, and he claimed to be Allah in the flesh, and like she said, they worshipped him as savior, you know. And he built this foundation of secrecy and this unquestioned loyalty, you know. And then, you know, you have Elijah, who came and he took over after Fard disappeared, but he was like his apprentice, for lack of better words. He was, you know, his person, and I don't know why he chose him, but like I told you, Elijah knew Islam through the Ahmadi Mosque, which I don't know if we have any Nation of Islam folks here, but there is a slight difference in the Quran that the Ahmadis use that everyone else uses, and it's just the way that the chapters are numbered. And all of the only Quran that they use is the Ahmadi Quran, by the way, still to this day. So the ties to Ahmadiyya is still there. But yeah, he took over. Elijah did. He built the NOI into, you know, what it is, this powerhouse of businesses. And you got to think, this was not an educated man. Elijah was not educated. He was not even very lettered, right? He had all of these.
He was a pedophile too.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and he was a pedophile. But how did this man, along with this Pakistani man who was teaching Black people about their identity, build all these businesses, these schools, and amass all of these followers? He had all these secret teenage mistresses. This man, I think he had at least 12 or 13 children outside of his actual marriage. And we all know that the reason why Malcolm X, you know, got into it with him and ended up leaving is because Malcolm wasn't down with that. He wanted nothing to do with him and his pedophilia. This led to their big fallout.
And then too, Muhammad Ali, he wasn't feeling for that either.
Yep. He forgot that. Muhammad Ali didn't like it.
Muhammad Ali wasn't feeling for it either. And they were trying to control his fights. They were saying, we'd like for you to lose this, lose this fight because we have this going on, and we need you to, you know, that's not cool. That is not.
I never knew that. I got to research that. I never knew that.
Yes, they were trying to control, you know, have dibs on his career, you know, and that's why I'm saying, like, it comes from a place of, they just, they didn't handle them well. Like people that were of affluent, they didn't handle them well. Like they thought maybe they had them so brainwashed that they were going to, that they thought that they, you know, a transference of one form of slavery to another, and they're thinking, well, I can control you and do these things with you, you know. So it's mind-boggling.
Wow.
Some of the things that went on there. Mm-hmm.
It is. It is. And not to mention like the violent things that happen. You mentioned that they were, you know, harming women.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention the Malcolm X assassination, where, you know, look, I have seen too much documentation, and there is one that Taz has. I'm gonna try to play it. And not tonight, but find it for you guys so you guys can hear it. But it was filmed way back then, and it's by someone that was in the FOI, and it makes a very compelling case for Elijah calling for the assassination of Malcolm. And here's the thing, Farrakhan has apologized for it, you know. And Elijah Muhammad, make no mistakes about it, it's not too far from the stretch of from the stretch of imagination, because he did maintain his power through fear.
Yep.
You know, they were afraid of this dude.
Yep.
You know,
and they would gaslight you. They would do the manipulation like that, and they were trying to do that. You know, everything like and within that sect of Islam, let me say it that way, within that sect of Islam, a lot of things are tied to what you do. Like your worth is tied to what you do. So the more productive you are in doing what you do, then the more your worth is to the nation to a degree.
So like, what do you mean?
So it's like an acquaintance of holiness being tied to how well you do something. It doesn't have much to do with not so much your character as much. Sorry, I just not so much your character, but it would have more to do with what your works are. So, so if you were to go against the grain, then, or if you were to have an opinion, like they wanted you to be like sheep, they wanted you to be like a machine, that maybe not even sheep, a machine that's always saying yes to them. So if you say no, or if you start to move away from that, then there's repercussions for that, you know. There's repercussions for that.
Yeah. And now, you know, and not to think of like, even like with Farrakhan, like Farrakhan is, you know, he has some viral videos where it seems like he's saying the right thing and he's, you know, leading righteously, but he's full of shit too.
Absolutely. I can't stand Farrakhan. Right.
Yeah, like he talks greasy. I've seen him say some really, really greasy stuff to women, to people, about certain subjects. And I could only imagine. Now, of course, he is, you know, he's charismatic, but you got to remember, this was Elijah's loyal soldier. You know, this was his loyal soldier. And a lot of people don't know that Elijah Muhammad's son actually was taking over the nation after Elijah passed away. But Warith didn't have the charisma. He didn't have the charisma of Malcolm. He didn't have, you know, I didn't even think Elijah was charismatic, actually. But he didn't have any of those things. And he wanted to move over to a more traditional form of Islam. In fact, there is a video on YouTube of him being interviewed. And he was upset that his father tried to make him believe that white Pakistani was God. He was like, my dad would have had a better chance getting me to believe that he was God than to make me think that this man with this white skin was God, especially based on their teachings. So he wanted to take them to a more traditional form of Islam, and they just were not doing it. Natasha says Farrakhan took money from Scientology to promote them, and Scientology does not like Black people. I knew you were so right about that. You were so right about that.
There was so much that they would lie about. There was so much that they would lie about behind the pulpit, because they would, that's like they would make certain statements about how they're doing certain things for the community, or they're doing certain things, legal actions. That was a big thing that they would talk about, is the legal actions they're taking. And people would be lapping that stuff up, and they weren't doing anything. They weren't doing anything at all. They were just taking the money from the people to help them on the causes they were referring to, you know. So it was, and the people I feel most sad for, to be quite frank, are the people in the community that, you know, were giving to all of these causes, that they were doing so much for them, and they weren't doing anything. They were saying they were doing something, that they weren't doing anything. And the people that were giving, you know, they were on like SSI. They were like on, you know, they were
on fixed incomes,
or they were in, you know, on TANF or things of that nature, you know. So, yep, it was a lot. It was a lot, you know. It was a lot. My dad was really upset when I, you know, had pretty much said that I was going to go the, you know, that I wasn't going to follow Islam, you know, because of him being a leader and things like that, it was going to make him not look good. And I really wasn't trying to make him look bad, but at the same time, I couldn't follow it because I couldn't jive with a lot of the stuff they were doing, you know. So it was a lot. And I got so persecuted, and we know for it too. Seriously, I got persecuted for it.
Really?
Oh my God, the emotional. I guess it all prepared me to be in my career as a therapist. Let's just put it that way, you know, because I would get talked about behind their. It was they let it be known they didn't like that I chose a direction with my faith. So
and like, you know, Farrakhan again, you know, his biggest win I think would be like the Million Man March or whatever, especially for like later generations or whatever. But let's never forget that he publicly defended Elijah Muhammad's secret kids. You know, he, like, you know, his connection to the assassination of Malcolm, which one thing that I don't think gets talked enough or properly deduced is the Malcolm that everybody celebrates is the Malcolm that he tried to separate himself from. Malcolm did not die Malcolm X. That's not who he left here completely separated and severed from the Nation of Islam. He wanted nothing to do with them. He left here Malik Shabazz, you know, and he did not want that to be his legacy. But we have such a, and I'm saying this not, you know, in quotes, such a reverence for the Nation of Islam and his connection for what they did to, you know, because honestly, I don't even think the Nation could have done what they did without Malcolm. They would not have the impact that they would have had. But Malcolm wanted nothing to do with them towards the end of his life. And that's has a lot to do with why he lost, you know, his life. But as far as like cult parallels, let's talk about it. You know, they control their members' lives.
The following that goes on. So, you know, if there's suspicion about people, there is a following that happens. There's also, you know, control factors. I recall like my parents were literally give the Nation a good portion, like at least 50 60%. Me and my stepbrother, we used to talk about that, like about how much money they would give to the nation, because we'd be like, what is the nation doing for you?
Wow.
You know, so what is the nation doing for you? And you know what? The nation wasn't doing all that much for them, you know, except
Yeah.
taking their money, and then and their whole life was around them. And I am not attacking Islam, because I think the faith and the religion of Islam, the what it was, for what it is overall, like if you look at the Quran, a lot of the things that they talk about, a lot of things that are in the Quran is actually not practiced with the Nation of Islam, if you really look
Yeah.
at it, which is sad to me.
Which
So
is why nobody recognizes them as Muslims outside of, like, our community, but like major sects of Islam, or what people would call traditional Islam, like Sunni, or Wahhabi, whatever, they don't believe that they're Muslim. And some people think it's racial, but it's really not racial. It's because of what she just said. They don't really follow. In fact, I know I went to a Savior's Day with one of my friends because it's like a big event in Chicago, and I remember them saying that they were Christians trying to be Muslims. Is that something? Did you ever hear them say that?
I never heard them
Because-
say that. What I heard them
Yeah.
say is that, well, they might say they're Christians because a lot of them came from the Christian faith and converted to the
Mhm.
nation. But one of the things that I know that they would say is that um, what the messaging was is because of the colorism and racism that existed, they were never going to be fully accepted by other Muslims. And
Hmm.
so they had accepted that and still decided to have their own sect of that. And that was actually something I believe that Elijah Muhammad was teaching the nation, to
And
accept the
he
fact
was
that we're separate. And it goes into, you're chosen, you're special because you're separate, that type of thing.
Ironically, he was also teaching colorism.
Yes, he was.
He taught color. You want to elaborate on that?
Um, so the colorism part of it was more about staying separated and not necessarily mixing with the other people, you know. So, or yeah, let's say another a- tactic of the cult, because I think if a lot of people would I think that if members of the nation really had connection and community with others with other Muslims, to be quite frank with you, Nyla, I don't think they would have stayed with the Nation of Islam, because the Nation of Islam is so fractured in their teachings, and they're so segregate within how they teach things and explain things to other people, and they can't validate it with the Quran. Probably, I'm not to think about it, when you talk about the Christians trying to be Muslims, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take passages from scripture, which was another thing that used to turn me off. They would take passages from scriptures and they would mix up the story to fit with the narrative that they wanted to talk about. And I swear, y'all, they would talk about how Job was flying on an airplane. And I'm like, Job wasn't flying on no airplane. No, ain't no plane coming, and
Girl,
all
if
of
you
those
don't
kinds of
stop.
things. It was weird, like some of the things that they would talk about,
They
or they would.
said Job was flying on an airplane.
I'm using that as like an extreme example, but
Okay.
as a way to like prove their point about something. So if they wanted to prove their point about how, let's say, um, if they want to prove their point about how the white man is the devil, they would take a piece of scripture, and then they would take some of the Quran, and then they would tell a story from the Bible, combine it all together in order to validate the reason why all white people are from the devil. So I couldn't get around that. That was crazy to me.
Yeah. Yeah. They're literally what they say that everybody else is in, in that regard,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
that is insane. Now, I was told by Alethea that part of the colorism that they practiced was they would teach that, like, if you were light skinned, you need to be with somebody dark skinned. If you were dark skinned, you need to be with someone light skinned. Like, they didn't want two light skinned people to be together or something like that. But then I don't think Farrakhan practiced that, because I think both of his wives are light skinned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? And in fact, in the movie, I think that was referenced as well.
That may have been discussed, but I think that may have also, remember when I was talking about how their messaging changes over time? So it could also have been a messaging changing over time as well, because I recall hearing that when I was younger, but it seemed to evolve a little bit more when I was like in middle school and high school.
Got it. Got it.
Which was weird to me. If you're going to stand on something, stand on it 10 toes down,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's definitely given cult.
Well, and Elijah Muhammad was a colorist. Like he had his own little flavor. He preferred, he had his preferences for what he preferred when it came to women, and I don't believe it was dark-skinned women.
So. No. Him and Farrakhan both, they preferred them. I think one of Farrakhan's wives was actually kind of racially ambiguous, which,
right.
I guess everyone is allowed to have their preferences, but it's just ironic that neither one of the leaders had not even a brown skin wife.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and there was also sexism involved too. So, as far as boys' task and the task of the women and the task of the sons of the task of the girls and the task of the boys and training and teaching,
Well, yeah, Fuzzy says he thinks dark skin is a curse. There are a lot of religions that believe that. I told y'all, I remember getting on the train to go to the Taste of Chicago, and they were Mormons. And ironically, we have Black people that are Mormons. And he told me, he was like, you know what? If you pray and you get your life in order, when you go to heaven, you can be white just like me. I will never forget that. I was like you? White like you? No, thank you.
But when I really got out of it, I had to go on a whole cleansing, healing journey, cleansing, all those things. I had because there was so much manipulation, there was so much gaslighting, there was so much emotional abuse that I was coming out of, because I was like a rebel to a degree, because I wasn't eating what they were giving me, and if you don't eat what they give you, they'll do what they could. And I think about it because, in some countries, in some sects, because it's not all Muslims believe this way, but if you go a different way with the faith, they could kill you. So I'm happy I didn't get killed. But I mean, but there were some things I had, or some narratives and things I had to shift for myself as I got older, because they were really trying to keep me in my place. And when you're a kid, you don't have a voice, you know,
Right.
or you're told something's wrong with you if you. So it was a lot. I'm glad I'm on the other side of that, you know, but it was a lot. It was a lot, you know. I
Yeah.
think that I think in theory what my parents did was I understand why my parents did what they did in theory, but it was also how things would look, like how would it look, which is another sign of a cult, right? How would
Hmm.
it look if she's not this or if she's not doing that? How does that look? And
Hmm.
and and it that wasn't good, you know, as far as I was concerned, you know, at least for me, you know. But even like isolation goes into, you know, the idea of it being part of a cult, because Elijah Muhammad was encouraging people, you stay in this little sector, don't talk to the others, you know.
Hmm.
Even the exclusive doctrine, you know, you stay in this little area, don't combine with the other. It's like they took pieces of the Quran to fit whatever narrative they wanted it to fit for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can definitely see that.
Another thing I would say too is that the recruitment. Thank you, Lilith's Revenge. I'm happy I got out too. Um, the other thing that I would say is that, you know, they're very, very aggressive with their recruitment. Do you think they're aggressive with their recruitment, Nyla?
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Oh,
okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because like if they almost force you to cuss them out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They force you to cuss them out. Hmm.
So here's a story. So my stepmother passed away, I think like um well, my past stepmother passed away like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, right?
I'm sorry.
And thank you. You know, I'm on the other side of that. And when she passed away, um, my father wanted to have, you know, people from the mosque, you know, officiate the funeral. And it was a full recruitment of joining the Nation of Islam. They didn't talk about my stepmother. They didn't talk about how she was living this life and things of that nature. You know how like you have a memorial service for a funeral and you reflect on that person?
Right.
They gave a uh, recruitment in the Christian world. It would be like an evangelism thing to
Hmm.
join the Nation of Islam
At a funeral.
at my stepmother's funeral, and most of the people there um, were Christian.
Wow.
So it's like they didn't even read the room. And I will say something too that really infuriated me is they on the day of my stepmother's passing, which would be a grandmother to my son, they were trying to they were trying to recruit him to become a Muslim. It was no, my condolences for your loss. It was no, I'm really concerned about those things. And my stepbrothers, who were there when they saw all these things happening, I could tell they were furious. So I had gotten up and I said some words about her, but and it tended to do a shift in the atmosphere as far as that was concerned. But they were just so aggressive about it. It's like they don't know how to
Read the room.
they don't know how to like just shut it off, you know, as far as, because after a while it becomes like verbal, like you're being accosted to a point, you know. So that was one of the things too that I would say. But they would do that all the time. Like I remember I was you know, I would be in the car with them, and it didn't matter if it was a 15-minute drive or if it was a 2.5 hour drive. They were trying to like, it was a total thing about how wonderful um becoming a Muslim is and how it's, it was how wonderful becoming a Muslim is and how great and fantastic all those things are.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Just a mess. But still, like, here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are with them. Like, on one hand, they gave the Black community some sort of identity, albeit it came from a Pakistani man, right? But what? The leader is worshipped like God, and then we got scandal upon scandal, people telling you how to dress, how to spend your money. Doing that at your stepmother's funeral just sounds wild.
Girl. My brothers were ready to get up and I was like, okay, let me get up because I don't want them on the day of their mother's funeral. The last thing we need to be doing when everybody's hurting is cussing people out, fighting, and all this other stuff because they were like furious.
I bet
Mm-hmm.
they were.
Mm-hmm.
I bet they were.
But those were some of the things that I've come across that I regarding with the Nation of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree, Lovejoy, that some of the Christian things, that they do that kind of stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
That it feeds into them. I think if a cult is a cult, it doesn't matter if it's Muslim or whatever. I know we're just talking about Nation of Islam, and that's what I know because that's what I grew up in as a kid. But yeah, but a cult is a cult.
Yeah, the Nation is probably one of the longest running Black American cults to date. It probably is. Yeah.
Relly, you thought I should let him get cussed out? That's funny.
Yeah, I agree with Relly.
I didn't want them to have that memory. Like my children were there, my nephews were there. I didn't want them to have that memory of that on the day of her funeral.
Girl, when they got older, they would have appreciated it.
Yeah.
That would let me stop.
I just didn't want another trauma to be on top of.
Yeah, you were right.
Already experiencing a trauma because there's death, and I didn't want to add to the trauma.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't want to add to the trauma.
Yeah. Dion's Break says, even though I think Gene Deal is full of it, he did mention Muslims at the time of Biggie's death. I don't remember in what regard he did.
I don't remember that.
Me neither.
Mm-mm. Right, and a cult is a cult story. You're right. You're right. I think one of the biggest things is, whenever you go about and doing these things, make sure you do don't just take people's words. And it's sorry to say that, but do your own due diligence, do your own religion, or do your own research of what's important to you. What are your foundational things, and then match it up with what you are and what you're doing. I think that's the biggest thing. Right. So I guess was there anything else you wanted to bring up with me? What do y'all think? You guys think it's okay? All right. So, all right. Well, I guess that was about it. That was all I have, y'all, as far as talking about it and everything. How did they come to the belief of the UFO? I don't know.
I think it came from Scientology.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's where it came from. Yeah. Thanks, Lovejoy.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Well, my whole thing was I didn't want to disrespect my family. So I hope if they're watching, I hope they're not. But it is my story and it is my truth. So,
yeah. So I just want to thank you for having me on.
of course.
This was good. I think we need to do some more cults.
Okay.
And I want to thank you guys for coming over and supporting Elisha. Please be sure to like the video, share if you can, and most importantly, sub to the channel. Check out some of the content. Maybe we should do a part 2 where we go into the UFO teaching, the spaceship, and all the weird outside stuff. We can do that. We can do a part 2 and get into that mess, because the chariot and all these prophets that are supposed to be they're supposed to be like around, I think, Antarctica. They said that they were. It's crazy. It's
crazy.
Is
wild.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are they trying to create their own, like, Elijah?
Yes.
That's mountain exactly what they're trying experience to do. From the scriptures.
Yep.
Wow.
Oh, look at Alam Plum Publications got the photograph of, look at you, got a troll. You are not yourselves. but you got a dead Pakistani in your avatar. Okay, honey. Right. Anyway, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Y'all, we're going to go ahead and close this out because I got to be somewhere early in the morning. So we're going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you for joining us in Elisha Space. If you are, if you are not a part of Let's Address This, you need to be, seriously. So go ahead and get on her channel. And then if what I talked about, and if you like some stuff on my page, subscribe to me too. So we'll see you soon and talk to you guys another time. Bye, y'all.